Hey, welcome to Genre Chat. I'm Caleb Walton, and tonight our guest is Tina Yeager. How are you doing, Tina?
Fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Is it hot down there in Florida?
It is not as hot as it's going to be in about a month or two. But it's warm.
We got a little bit of a reprieve today in South Carolina. It was really, really hot over the weekend, and today it's just cool enough so that you don't completely bake when you get in the car. So we just kind of skip over spring and go straight to summer. But I'm really happy you're on the show. I wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight about the psychology behind character and character development. I know you've got a lot of experience. I know you're a professional counselor and have a lot of experience that people might not necessarily think of when they think about what makes a good writer. But I guess that's what we do, is just draw from our own experiences. What different things are you involved in? How did you first start writing? And tell us a little bit more about your experience in psychology and counseling.
I actually have always been a writer. Even as a young child, I wrote poetry and stories and acted out all kinds of fantasy plots and loved writing all through into college. I even have a bachelor's degree in creative writing. That doesn't have to be your story if you are called to be a writer. In fact, I went away from that call for a long time before I came back to it, and came back to it after I had gotten a degree in mental health counseling, which strangely enough does go together with writing. You might think they're separate, but they do work together very well. So I'm involved with Word Weavers International. I'm a mentor of 4 groups in different states. I have a devotional publication online that any of your listeners can submit to if they like. It's called Inspirations Online. It's by writers for writers. We actually have a team of editors. It is a publication. You can get publishing credits if you're looking for that, and we screen them. We may have to tell you to go back and fix some things before we can publish it, but we take reprints as long as it's about writing or geared toward writers. So I'm loving that. That's all volunteer. It's not a paid gig, but it's definitely worth it to encourage writers. I'm also working on promoting a book that's coming out this summer called Beautiful Warrior: Finding Victory Over the Lies Formed Against You. It's on Christ-centered esteem and significance for women. So I'm very excited about that and working hard. So I'm involved in lots of things, obviously.
How long have you been a part of Word Weavers? We just actually opened up a chapter in my hometown. And it's been, I think we've been maybe about 2 or 3 months. We started at the beginning of the year, and it's got about 5 or 6 members now.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad you have a Word Weavers there. I've been in Word Weavers since 2006, when there was only one Word Weavers in Orlando. We didn't have chapters. It wasn't international. So it's been fun to see Word Weavers grow so much over the years and touch so many lives and really help writers move toward their calling and purpose.
It's really awesome. I've really enjoyed it. It was a blessing how fast it took off. It honestly started me, and honestly, my Spanish teacher from high school was also a writer. Sort of started it up, and last week we may have had 8 actually people join. So it's the interest is a lot. Honestly, surprised me how many writers there were in the area, but that's just the beauty of it, I guess.
Yes, and editors and publishers recognize Word Weavers as a wonderful organization. So when you go to a conference, if you say you're a Word Weaver, they'll be impressed.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful thing, is just learning the skill of the critique and how to properly critique, and then how to be critiqued with etiquette, which is something that I guess is very impressive when you're actually in front of a professional and wanting to appear professional.
Right. And there's so much to learn from Word Weavers. If you're new, you can learn from the people who are seasoned. So we have conferences, community, and critique. There's all kinds of things that you can get from your Word Weavers group.
Awesome. It's a wonderful community. Well, I wanted to learn a little bit more about how your background in counseling and mental health care has helped you as a writer sort of character's mind and figure out their motivation.
Character should be as realistic as possible, so they should be as human as possible. And the more you know about the mindset of a real person and how someone is constructed in their psyche, with their personalities, their backstory, mental health issues, or simply the things that we struggle with in crisis or trauma, and how someone responds to that realistically, it's going to give your characters a more vivid 3-dimensional quality that captures the imagination and the heart of your reader and immerses them in the story. So it's very important to consider those things when you're writing a story. If you don't have those skills, you can research them. You don't have to be a counselor, but you can draw on the expertise of counselors or of real people to build more realistic characters.
That's very interesting. How long did you work in mental health care?
I'm still licensed as a mental health counselor, but I do life coaching. So
Okay.
I have been licensed since 2005. And I worked a little bit before that in the process of getting the degree and getting licensed. You have so many hours that you have to work with clients. So I think it was probably, 3 years of that. So
How long were you in that area before you realized how helpful that could be in constructing vivid characters?
I don't know how long that was, because I think it kind of naturally goes together as you're writing to pull in all the things that you know. So it's kind of hard to know when that transition happened. It's who you are. I mean, what you do, what you're experienced to, what you learn becomes part of who you are. So it's hard to set a point at which this became an impact on that. Because everything that we do and we're exposed to is an impact on the things that we are crafting in our art.
I always love when I'm reading behind someone, or when I'm writing. Well, when I'm writing, obviously, you should know where some of the inspiration comes from. But when you're reading and you see little subtle things that you wonder, why did that particular stand out to you about this setting or this person, or what experience led to you wanting to incorporate that. And I love almost guessing sometimes what the author draws from when they're putting that stuff in there. What's the first step that you like to take when you're trying to dig into a character's psyche and understand how their mind works?
I'm a daydreamer. I'm an organic writer. Some people call it a pantser. I don't know that I like that term. It sounds very strange to me. But I like to just kind of go with what appears in my mind as that character. And then when I delve in further, you can use a tool like a personality test. If you really want to go into thinking about, is this person an extrovert or an introvert? And what would that really look like in their behavior and the way that they interact with other characters? Think about not just their personality, but their backstory. How does that play into what's going to happen with that character? And daydream that character into existence before you put them on the page, because that'll keep you from info dumping on your first page of your novel. You might want to flesh all that out, but don't do it for the reader. The reader will be bored. Know your character well enough to paint them and then write them.
Exactly. I heard it was maybe within the first 40 pages, never really reveal any major secrets about your character or about the story itself. 40 or 50 pages, sort of, that's the time to almost romance the reader.
Yeah, you want to have some sense of tension, some sense of mystery to draw that reader in and have intrigue. If the reader's not interested in finding out more, you haven't drawn them into the story. You're giving them too much at the beginning.
Absolutely. One struggle that I've had is on the writing project I'm working on now. As a matter of fact, my main character has a lot of psychological issues, and I had someone read. Actually, it was a word reader's critique, and the person that was critiquing it said, "I'm kind of torn because I want to know more. Like right now, like I really don't want to have to wait 200 pages to figure out the answer to this, but you also need to leave some things until later. You can't give away the whole story at once." I guess it's just a balance almost sometimes of what you give away and what you save till later.
You have to give enough for the reader to connect with the character. So you don't want to give too much, but you don't want to give too little either. There has to be something that endears us to or connects us with that character. Some flaw, some idiosyncrasy, something that the reader can either relate to or empathize with.
That's what's important, is how to relate to the character. And then you almost feel, then you hurt for them as you go through it, and that's what keeps us up late at night.
Have you ever watched a movie where you didn't care about the character and you turned it off?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to care about them. How simple or complex does a character's emotional or mental struggle need to be? I mean, what role does that play in how they interact with their environment and with the story? I know obviously you don't want them to have too many complex issues going on that would get in the way of the story, but then you don't want it to be something simple that could be easily overcome without having to go through the journey.
I would err more on the side of complex rather than on the side of too simple. Something has to have enough layers of complexity to be realistic. Have you ever met an individual who had a very simple character that didn't have layers? Each person has lots of things going on, in their true selves. They've got a childhood. How were they treated in childhood? They've got a teenage years in which people go through all kinds of angst and social pressures. How did that affect them? And then what decisions did they make in new adulthood? How did that shape? How do they choose to shape who they were becoming based on where they'd been and where they wanted to go? And those kinds of things are important. When you think about all the layers of a real individual, you probably aren't going to be too complex. The key is not to reveal information that's not pertinent to the story.
Ah, interesting. That's some things I've heard people express that they have trouble with is if they go in and create a very in-depth backstory, they're tempted to include elements that aren't necessary. And that's something I've heard from organic writers or pantsters, as they're called, that sort of a freeing thing to almost discover it as you go along rather than try to do a lot of back work and then figure out how to incorporate it naturally as the story progresses.
I like the planter word because it sounds very organic to me. And
that would probably be me.
You plan a little bit, but you let the story take you and change as it goes, and then you can go back and clean it up at the end. But make sure that you know your character well enough that before you write the story, that you don't have to discover them as you're writing. That's when we start to put too much information. When you're trying to discover who your character is as a writer, as you're writing, then you're going to put more things in than you need to. Just know that you can go back and edit that. It's not the end of the world. You can go fix those things at the end if you're an organic writer. And most of us who are organic do a lot of editing at the end.
I'm so envious of organic writers just because it seems like it would be so much fun. With me, I get so stressed out not knowing what's going to happen and writing yourself in and out of a corner. And I know some people do it. I mean, Stephen James is one of the champions of organic writing, and he makes it look so easy. And I've tried it, and it's like, I guess, you have to do whatever works for you and can get a really, really good story out for each writer.
Well, he won't tell you it's easy. If you were to ask him,
oh no, he'll never
tell you that it's easy. It looks easy because he does his work. He works really hard to make that look polished. And I agree, he is a stellar example of polished, beautiful, flawless writing. When his work is done, it is impeccable. However, he works at it. And he edits it numerous times to get it to that point. So when you're looking at a polished writer's end result, don't think that has to be your first draft. Don't let that stop you in your tracks and think, oh, I can never be like that. Well, you could if you worked at it hard enough.
That's one of the first lessons I learned when I started learning more about the craft and meeting other writers, is that you can't write something to perfection to begin with. You can't write the first chapter until it's perfect, because it's probably going to change no matter how many times you write it. By the end of it, it's going to change again. So that was my biggest flaw, was spending 2-3 weeks on one chapter instead of writing it and moving on to the next part.
Yes. You can't just expect yourself to have flawless writing, and you really shouldn't compare your writing to other people's writing. Unless you're learning a skill or learning a craft, you can watch how they do it and learn how to do it and make it your own, but don't expect your writing to be exactly like someone else's. You were created to be you, and no one will ever create the writing you create. So be esteemed in what you're called to do on your own, not trying to be somebody else. That's very important, because if you're constantly trying to be Max Lucado or Tosca Lee or Stephen James, you will never be you, and the world will miss out on what you have to offer.
Absolutely. It's almost like a fingerprint. Each writer's voice and story is unique, and you can't duplicate it.
Right.
Which is one of the amazing things about it.
Yes.
What's the difference? I know we were speaking about this a minute before we started recording. What's the difference between an internal and an external struggle for a character?
An internal struggle is the character discovering who they really are, something that is an issue within them, that is a conflict they're trying to resolve, whether it is a mental conflict, a conflict in their emotions, or a conflict with overcoming a wound or a trauma or a lie or a fear in their past that was created. They're changing as the story goes along. That is the internal conflict. Every heroic character, your protagonist, should change somewhere in the story based on what they're doing and their choices they're making and the conflicts that are shaping them as they go through that story. The external conflict are the forces that are coming against your hero from the outside, whether it's a decision, a circumstance, or an antagonist, or some combination of those things. That's the external conflict.
Okay, so the external conflict, I'm assuming, also would help draw out the internal conflict and affects the way that they interact with that and sort of go through both the inside and the outside journey.
Yes, absolutely.
With all of the complex like motivations and fears and stuff, how do you choose which one is most prevalent for that particular character? I mean, obviously, the things that we do every day are driven by probably countless, things that we don't even realize that affect how we perceive the world. But I mean, with a character, you probably have to just pick like maybe one or two and focus on those.
Depends on your story, and it depends on your character. Those things should tell you what is appropriate. You shouldn't just pick one and say, oh, this is a popular, trendy thing. I think I'll do this. You should pick something that's appropriate for the story and appropriate for you as a writer. If it's going to bring out your voice and it's going to be the story that you're called to write, then use that in your story.
Interesting. So it's very unique to each character, sort of a get to know the character, and then that'll sort of help work itself out a little bit more.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it may just come to you. To me, as an organic writer, it'll come to me that this would be what if. Your what if questions are where these things are born. As a writer, that's the most fun part of writing, is that what if stage where you're coming up with a new story idea. What if the world fell down on a chicken's head? What if that really happened? How much fun would that be to write a story about that? And the chicken had lied about it before. Nobody believes him. Oh, how much fun that would be. Wouldn't that be a great children's story? So think about what would be a good story, but it starts with that what if question, and then start to feel out and tease out what if, and then this, and then that, and then that, and you just kind of spider plot all your things out. And that's if you're a planner. If you're a pantser, you may tease all those things out as you're playing with the doodles of your story to get it straightened out as you write it.
That would probably be the reason I wouldn't classify myself as an organic writer, just because I tend to get on a roll too quickly and plot too much out, and then I'm like, well, I have the whole story now, what do I do? But I mean, yeah, I guess that's where it comes into being improvising in the moment, not necessarily sticking strictly to your outline or to your ideas, but letting them guide you, but not like a straight path, but more like just a general sense of direction.
You have to do what works for you. You shouldn't say, I have to do this because this writer does it that way. Be what you are and write the way you should write. Write what's comfortable for you in that pattern, and just learn to do it well in that respect. Davis Bunn, I think his plot is 30 pages long when he writes a plotting out of his story. I'm not writing 30 pages unless it's part of the story.
Exactly.
That's just great. But once he's written the plot, he's almost done. So that's the other part of it. You can do the work at the beginning, or you can kind of do it at the end. It just is what works for you.
Honestly, and honestly, that is some of the fun too, if you don't know quite what's going to happen next. Like, I think writing a story is the best way to experience a story, in my opinion. And you don't want to take all of the fun out of it and know everything that's going to happen. You wouldn't read a book if you already knew everything was going to happen.
That's why I'm more of an organic writer, because I would get bored if I knew what was going to happen the whole rest of the story. But I'm having to learn to be more of a planner at the beginning, because with the current fiction novel that I'm pitching, I also have an urban fantasy novel. Contemporary fantasy is another term for that genre. And I need to not know what's going to happen, or I'm going to be bored. However, when I pitch the first novel in the series, the editors are going to want to know what the next two books look like.
Very true.
I haven't read those yet, but I had to plot out the whole course of 2 separate books after my first book to pitch to an editor, so that they would have some idea of where I would be going with the series. And sometimes as an organic writer, you need to learn some planning and plotting skills in advance. It helps.
Exactly, because an agent's not going to want to hear, trust me, it'll be good, I'll figure it out. They want a little more assurance than that, especially with series.
Yes, publishers want to know that you can write more than one book in a fiction series, and they don't trust you because they've had bad experiences with people dropping the ball in the middle of a series before.
Now, I've heard different opinions. I've heard some people say that especially a new author shouldn't try to tackle a series, simply because you have to be very good in order to get someone to want to commit to you for that long length of time. And then I've also heard people say that a lot of times publishers will look specifically for series because they want to make sure that you can keep an audience for a long time. I mean, I guess both to a degree are correct, but which one do you think is a little bit more accurate of a picture of the industry?
You do what you feel called to do. Again, I know that's very vague, but you need to write what brings your heart out. I would say at the very least, finish the first book, because publishers not going to commit to you unless you finished one. And then sketch out series potential. This is the terminology they're looking for in your manuscript proposal, so that you can write additional books and you have them plotted out. But you may not want to invest all the time in writing all 3 novels. You might not sell all 3. You might sell 1, and they're not interested in 2 and 3, or the publisher collapses or gets bought by someone else, which is happening all the time. So just write at least 1. And if you feel led to write the other 2, do it. If you're really having fun writing it, go ahead. But don't do it and then be disappointed that you can't sell the next one to the same publisher as you had expected. Be open and flexible to that.
I guess that's why a lot of series, the first book is a little bit open-ended. It's not necessarily, I know the Hunger Games did this, several series did this, where the first book could technically have wrapped everything up and just sort of leave the rest up to your imagination, but then it did end up leading into a sequel.
Yes, you see that in the movie industry too. People will leave it open to a sequel. Sometimes you see the sequel and sometimes it never happens. But they leave that window open just in case.
Absolutely. That's very good strategy. Yeah, it's a very good strategy to do. What about characters with actual like mental or emotional disorders, or that have experienced some sort of trauma? I know the character that I'm writing right now has had a lot of trauma in his childhood, and he has a lot of psychological disorders that he's trying to wrestle with as he's going through the story. Does that change or deepen how much you have to put into their psychological makeup? I mean, I'm guessing there's a lot of research that has to go into exactly what's going on and how realistic it can be.
Please do your research if you're putting a character into your story that has mental health issues, because you will have readers who experience those mental health issues, and it will be insulting to them if you get it wrong. So please do the research, and please do not stereotype anyone with a mental illness. Make sure you've done enough depth in your character so that they appear to be relatable and realistic, and that they have qualities that your reader admires. Make sure that they are an admirable, esteemed character. We don't want to create any kind of negative stigma for mental illness, because there's enough of that out there that people are trying to fight already.
That's very true. And honestly, that's good with anything that could be slightly taboo or not common. You know, if you're writing any type of character that could go into a stereotype. You know, make sure that there's someone that has very good qualities so that the audience knows that you're not trying to demean them for something like that.
And with ethnicities, get yourself a sensitivity reader. That's important too. You can ask somebody that you know that comes from that perspective to read it for you and tell you what they think. Make sure it's somebody that's going to give you an honest opinion, not your mother. You know, someone
Absolutely.
not going to say, "Oh, honey, it's
everyone has that one friend that will tell you whatever is on their mind, no matter how it comes out." So that's when that can come in handy. Is when you need a sensitivity reader.
Yes.
Well, I have really enjoyed talking to you about all this. I've learned a lot. I can't wait to implement some of this stuff and find out a little bit more deeply about my own characters. Before we go, I know you do offer several courses actually, on the Serious Writer Academy. One of them, I know you talked a lot about discovering your creative identity. What does that mean to you when you think of that? What does that mean when you're trying to help others?
When you're discovering your creative identity, you're connecting with yourself as a creative person, and you're offsetting the potential for writer's block to keep you from your purpose. So we go into neurology, and we go into the things and the habits that you can put into place to keep your creativity alive and vibrant and glowing. So that's what we discuss in the creativity class. And then I also have the Psyched Characters class, so that you can get really in depth on how to develop three-dimensional vital characters that grasp that reader's imagination and pull them into the story and keep them there the entire time.
And that's one of the things that, I mean, all stories will have slow parts that even, with the plot may sag a little bit, but really compelling characters, I'm guessing, is what would keep a reader invested even in those moments. Like you don't care
Yes.
what she's doing. You want to find out what's happening.
Yes, if you love that character, you will be mad if the publisher doesn't produce another book in the series. Have you ever had that happen where you miss the characters at the end of the book and you're like, oh no,
Book
I missed
withdrawals are the worst. Book withdrawals are the worst. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Especially when then you remember that they actually don't exist. That's a very hard thing to do when you're a writer as well, because sometimes that's where the counseling can probably come in handy, because sometimes I think we writers kind of straddle on the edge of healthy and unhealthy, depending on how much we believe ourselves.
Yes, yes, but it's very healthy to write, and that gets all on the page, and so we can kind of make that world happen for readers. And you can do lots of wonderful things through fiction to speak to your readers about truth. And I think that's also a wonderful thing, as well as entertaining your reader.
Absolutely. Before we go, do you have any last minute advice for writers? Maybe not even about a specific topic, just maybe something you wish someone would have told you when you first started writing, a valuable piece of insight?
For writers, I would say just be encouraged in who you are and do the best with what you have, and you will be able to touch the people you're meant to touch. I think that's important to remember. You're not going to be just like anybody else, but remember who you are, and remember that you're called to this. It's not going to be easy, but things that are worth doing are rarely easy.
That's very true. Very true, as a matter of fact. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I enjoyed having you. We will see you guys next time on Genre Chat. Thank you for watching.